I sat at the long mahogany table during the will reading, my palms pressed flat against the cool wood. My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. The sound made everyone flinch. "She doesn't deserve a single cent," he announced, his voice carrying across the silent room. "She's ungrateful." My chest tightened as 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Aunt Marian's mouth fell open. Uncle Frank looked at his shoes. My cousin, Emma, stared with something like pity mixed with relief that she wasn't the target. The lawyer, a thin man named Mr. Patterson, adjusted his glasses and continued reading the will. Everything went to my father and my brother, Nathaniel. The house, the business, the accounts. My grandmother had apparently left me nothing. My hands started shaking. I gripped the edge of the table to steady them. "That's not true," I whispered, but my voice barely carried past my own ears. My father turned to me with a smirk that made my stomach turn. "Maybe if you appreciated family, you'd be part of it." The silence that followed pressed against my eardrums. Shame burned across my face like I'd been slapped. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably, but nobody spoke up for me. My name is Isabella Rowan, and in that moment, I realized my own father had declared war on me. But something was wrong. Mr. Patterson was looking at me strangely, his eyebrows drawn together. His gaze held mine for just a second too long, like he was trying to communicate something he couldn't say aloud. The meeting ended with awkward shuffling and whispered conversations. People avoided looking at me as they filed out, like my humiliation might be contagious. Nathaniel clapped my father on the back, grinning like he'd won the lottery. I stood to leave, my legs unsteady beneath me. That's when Mr. Patterson appeared at my elbow. "Miss Rowan," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the murmur of departing relatives. "A moment, please." I followed him to the corner of the room, near the tall windows overlooking the garden my grandmother had loved. He glanced around nervously before leaning closer. "Your grandmother left instructions for you," he whispered. His eyes darted toward my father, who was accepting condolences from Aunt Marian. "Not for him." My heartbeat staggered in my chest. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, he slipped a sealed envelope into my hand. It was cream-colored, thick paper, with my name written in my grandmother's familiar handwriting. "Don't open it here," he murmured. Before I could ask anything else, heavy footsteps approached. My father stormed toward us, his eyes full of suspicion and something darker. His face had gone red, the way it always did when he felt his control slipping. "What's going on here?" he demanded. My father snatched my arm, his fingers digging into my flesh hard enough to leave marks. He pulled me away from Mr. Patterson, his voice dropping to a hiss only I could hear. "Don't start trouble, Isabella. Accept your place." Something inside me shifted. For 28 years, I'd let him speak to me this way. I'd absorbed his criticism, his disappointment, his casual cruelty. I'd made myself smaller to avoid his anger. Not anymore. I pulled my arm away, the motion sharp and deliberate. "You don't get to decide my place." His eyes widened. Shock flashed across his face because I'd never, not once in my entire life, talked back to him. He'd trained that defiance out of me years ago, or so he'd thought. "What did you just say to me?" His voice climbed higher. "You heard me." My voice was steadier than I expected. Nathaniel appeared beside our father, confusion written across his features. "What's happening?" "Your sister is making a fool of herself," my father snapped. But his eyes never left mine. I turned and walked toward the door, my legs feeling like they might give out any second. Behind me, I heard my father start to follow. But Aunt Marian intercepted him with some questions about the funeral arrangements. I made it to my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. Once inside, I locked the doors and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The envelope felt heavy in my purse. I pulled it out with trembling fingers and tore it open. Inside was a small brass key and a note in my grandmother's handwriting. "Everything isn't what it looks like." Storage unit number 47. The storage facility was on the edge of town. A squat concrete building surrounded by a chain-link fence. I'd driven there immediately, barely remembering the route. My mind spinning with questions. Unit number 47 was on the second floor at the end of a long corridor. The air smelled like dust and motor oil. My footsteps echoed off the metal walls. The key turned smoothly in the lock. The door rolled up with a screech that made me wince. Inside was exactly what you'd expect from a storage unit. Boxes stacked haphazardly. Old furniture covered in sheets, a lamp with a broken shade. My grandmother had been a saver, keeping everything that might be useful someday. I started searching, not entirely sure what I was looking for. I moved boxes, peered under furniture, and opened drawers in a dusty dresser. Then I found it. A locked metal box, small enough to fit under my arm, tucked behind a stack of photo albums. The brass key fits perfectly. My hands shook as I lifted the lid. Inside was a USB drive. Journal pages yellowed with age. Bank receipts paper-clipped together. And a notarized envelope labeled in thick black marker, "Real Will." My breath caught in my throat. Before I could process what I was holding, someone knocked on the unit door. 3 sharp raps that echoed in the metal space. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, listening to footsteps just outside the unit. A shadow moved under the gap at the bottom of the door. Seconds crawled by like hours. I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears. Whoever was out there wasn't leaving. They were waiting. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only a minute, the footsteps retreated down the hallway. I heard the distant clang of the stairwell door. My stomach dropped. Someone had followed me here. Someone knew I'd found something. I quickly gathered everything from the metal box and shoved it into my bag. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the USB drive twice. I pulled out my phone to check if my father had been tracking my location, but my settings showed nothing. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just another storage unit customer. But my grandmother's warning echoed in my mind. Everything isn't what it looks like. I locked the unit and rushed to my car, checking over my shoulder every few steps. The parking lot was empty except for my sedan and a dark SUV I didn't recognize. Once safely inside my apartment, I triple-checked the locks and closed all the blinds. Then I pulled out my laptop with trembling hands and inserted the USB drive. The USB contained several audio files, all labeled with dates. I clicked on the first one, dated 6 months before my grandmother's death. Her voice filled my small apartment, clear and strong despite her age. If you're listening to Isabella, it means he finally showed his true intentions. Tears immediately blurred my vision. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from sobbing out loud. She continued, her words measured and careful. "Your father has been manipulating me for years. He convinced the nurses to adjust my medications without telling me. He gained control of my bank accounts by claiming I was mentally unfit. He isolated me from friends who questioned his behavior." The recording went on for 20 minutes, detailing specific incidents. Times when she'd been lucid, but he'd told doctors she was confused. Money that had disappeared from her accounts while he claimed to be protecting her from scammers. Legal documents she'd supposedly signed but couldn't remember. "I started recording our conversations," she explained. "I kept copies of every bank statement, every doctor's note, every piece of correspondence. I knew nobody would believe an old woman over her successful son. So I documented everything. I played through file after file, each one revealing another layer of my father's manipulation. By the 4th recording, I was crying openly, grief and rage mixing together until I couldn't tell them apart. The last file was different. When I tried to open it, a password prompt appeared on the screen. I spent hours trying to guess the password. I tried her birthday, my birthday, her wedding anniversary, her maiden name. Nothing worked. After the 10th failed attempt, the system warned me. I had only 5 tries remaining before the file would lock permanently. I sat back, exhausted and frustrated. What would she have chosen? What was important enough to guard this final piece of information? I picked up her journal pages, studying the handwriting I knew so well. She'd written about family dinners, garden projects, and memories from her childhood. Then I noticed something. In the margin of one page, she doodled a tiny calendar with a date circled. my birth date. Underneath, in letters so small I'd almost miss them. She'd written, "The day she became mine." My grandmother had been 42 when I was born. My mother had died when I was 3. And my grandmother had stepped in to raise me while my father buried himself in work. She'd been more mother than grandmother to me. With shaking hands, I typed in my birth date. The file opened. The screen displayed a scanned document. At the top, in bold letters, "Legal transfer of full ownership." Below it, line after line of legal language I struggled to parse. But one thing was crystal clear. Everything had been transferred to me. Isabella Rowan, the house, the business, the accounts, everything. I called Mr. Patterson's office first thing the next morning. Before I could lose my nerve, his secretary tried to schedule me for the following week. But I told her it was urgent. Something in my voice must have convinced her, because she put me through immediately. "Miss Rowan," he said, "I was hoping you'd call." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop across town, somewhere my father wouldn't think to look for me. I arrived 30 minutes early, ordered a tea I couldn't drink, and claimed a table in the back corner. Mr. Patterson arrived exactly on time, carrying a leather briefcase. He looked tired, like he hadn't been sleeping well either. "Show me what you found," he said without preamble. I pulled out everything. The USB drive, the journal pages, the bank receipts, and, most importantly, the notarized will. He examined each item carefully, his expression growing more serious with each page he read. Finally, he sat back and removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "This changes everything." "Is it real?" I asked. "Is it legal?" "It's absolutely real," he confirmed. "This will was properly notarized and witnessed. It supersedes the one your father presented." He paused. "The will your father showed us yesterday was a forgery. This is a fraud, Miss Rowan. Serious fraud." My hands shook around my teacup. "So everything actually belongs to me. The house, the business, all accounts and assets." "Yes," he leaned forward. "But I need to ask you something important. Do you want to handle this quietly, or do you want to pursue this publicly?" I thought about my father's smirk at the will reading, the humiliation of having every relative watch me be declared unworthy. His voice said I didn't deserve anything. I met Mr. Patterson's eyes. "Publicly." His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Then we have work to do." That evening, my phone rang. My father's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "We need to talk," he said. His voice was cold and controlled. "Come to dinner tomorrow night. 7 o'clock. I almost declined the dinner invitation. Every instinct screamed that it was a trap. But Mr. Patterson convinced me to go, to hear what my father wanted to say before we made our legal move. "Know your enemy," he'd advised. The next evening, I pulled up to my father's house at exactly 7 o'clock. It was a massive colonial he'd bought with my grandmother's money, though he'd never acknowledged that fact. Every light in the house blazed, making it look almost cheerful, but I knew better. Nathaniel answered the door, smirking. "Look who decided to show up." My father waited in the dining room, sitting at the head of the table like a king holding court. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." I sat. Dinner was already plated. Some elaborate meals that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Neither of them touched their food. "I'll get straight to the point," my father said. He slid a document across the polished table toward me. "Sign this." I picked it up. It was a release form, stating that I accepted receiving nothing from my grandmother's estate and waived all rights to contest the will. My signature line waited at the bottom next to a pen he'd thoughtfully provided. "Sign it," he repeated. "Then we can move on as a family. Put all this unpleasantness behind us." I read through the document twice, making them wait. Then I pushed it back across the table, unsigned. "No." My father's jaw tightened. Nathaniel's smirk faltered. "What did you say?" I said no. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not signing anything." My father stood too, his face darkening. "You're making a mistake, Isabella." "I don't think so." He moved closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Then you'll regret it." The threats started that night. Anonymous text messages flooded my phone at 2 in the morning, jolting me awake. Ungrateful brat. You're embarrassing the whole family. You'll never win. Just give up already. I blocked each number, but more kept coming from different area codes. Someone had organized a campaign to wear me down, and I had a pretty good idea who. By morning, I had 17 messages. By noon, 34. My hands trembled as I deleted each one, but I saved screenshots of everything. Evidence, Mr. Patterson had said. Document everything. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, my phone buzzed with a message from a name I recognized. Thomas Chen, the accountant for my grandmother's business. The company she'd supposedly left to my father. We need to meet. I have information you need to see. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., City Park, North Entrance. Come alone. I stared at the message for a long moment before responding. I'll be there. Thomas Chen was already waiting when I arrived at the park. Sitting on a bench near a fountain. He was in his early 50s, with graying hair and the look of a man who hadn't slept properly in weeks. A manila folder rested on his lap. Miss Rowan, he said as I approached. He didn't stand. Thank you for coming. I sat beside him, maintaining some distance. Your message said you had information. I do. He glanced around nervously, like he expected someone to be watching. I've worked for your family's business for 15 years. I knew your grandmother well. She trusted me. And he opened the folder. Inside were copies of financial statements, transfer records, and emails I've never seen before. Your father has been embezzling from the company for 3 years. He's been writing checks to fake vendors, authorizing wire transfers to offshore accounts, and inflating expense reports. My stomach dropped as I flipped through the pages. The amounts were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. Your brother knew about it, Thomas continued quietly. He helped forge some of the signatures. They thought because your grandmother was old and sick, nobody would notice the discrepancies. But you noticed. I noticed. He pulled out more pages. I made copies of everything before they could destroy the evidence. Bank records, forged signatures, email communications discussing how to hide the transfers. It's all here. I looked at him carefully. Why are you showing me this? You could lose your job worse. His mouth pressed into a thin line. Because your grandmother was a good woman. She didn't deserve what they did to her, and neither do you. He paused. Your father told me that if I talked to anyone about this, I'd lose everything. My job, my reputation, maybe my freedom. He said he'd find a way to make it look like I was the one stealing. Are you willing to testify? If you protect me, yes. His hands shook slightly as he handed me the folder. I have a family to think about. But I also have a conscience. I took the folder, weighing its importance. This wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. This was fraud, embezzlement, theft on a massive scale. Thank you, I said quietly. I'll make sure you're protected. For the next week, I barely slept. Mr. Patterson and I went through every piece of evidence, organizing it into a case so airtight that my father wouldn't be able to lie his way out. The real will, the recordings, the financial documents from Thomas, the threatening messages. Everything painted a picture of a man who'd systematically stolen from his own mother and then tried to steal her final wishes as well. I didn't confront my father. I didn't call Nathaniel to plead my case. I didn't try to convince relatives that I was telling the truth. I just worked quietly, methodically, building my defense brick by brick. Revenge isn't loud, I realized. It's precise. It's patient. It waits for the right moment and then strikes without mercy. My grandmother had taught me that in her own way. She documented everything because she knew nobody would believe. Accusations without proof. She'd been strategic even at the end of her life. Now it was my turn. It's time. Mr. Patterson said one morning as we finished reviewing the final documents. We have everything we need. That afternoon, we filed the real will with the probate court. We submitted the fraud report. We requested an emergency hearing. Court dates were issued. My father would be notified within hours. I went home and waited, my heart pounding with anticipation and dread. The explosion came faster than I expected. At 8 that evening, someone started pounding on my apartment door. Isabella, open this door right now. My father's voice, raw with rage. I know you're in there. How dare you? How dare you? I stood in my living room, frozen, as he continued to pound and shout. Neighbors' doors opened. Someone threatened to call the police. I never opened my door. I just listened to him rage until building security finally escorted him out. The next morning, a process server knocked on my door. My father was suing me for defamation, emotional distress, and alienation of affection. The irony wasn't lost on me. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Cold fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, washing everything in a harsh white glow. I sat beside Mr. Patterson at the defendant's table, my hands folded in my lap to keep them from shaking. My father sat across the aisle with his attorney, a sharp-looking woman named Ms. Carver, who'd built a reputation defending wealthy clients. He wouldn't look at me. Nathaniel sat behind him, his face pale. The judge, an older woman with steel gray hair, entered and everyone stood. Judge Morrison, according to the nameplate on her bench. She had the look of someone who'd seen every trick in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. Let's begin, she said. My father's attorney went first. She painted me as an unstable woman who'd fabricated evidence to steal an inheritance from her grieving family. She called me entitled, manipulative, and greedy. Miss Rowan has manufactured a conspiracy theory to explain why her grandmother left her nothing, Ms. Carver argued. The truth is simpler and sadder. Her grandmother knew her character and made the appropriate choice. I sat silent, the way Mr. Patterson had instructed. Don't react, he'd said. Let them talk. Let them dig their own grave. My father took the stand. Under oath, he described how devoted he'd been to his mother, how he'd managed her care, her finances, her medical decisions, how I'd rarely visited, rarely called. I loved my mother, he said, his voice breaking with practiced emotion. And it hurts that Isabella would disrespect her memory this way. Then it was our turn. Mr. Patterson stood and approached the bench. Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that directly contradicts everything Mr. Rowan just testified. He played the first recording. My grandmother's voice filled the courtroom, clear and calm, describing how my father had manipulated her medications. Several people in the gallery gasped. My father's face is drained of COLORM's Carver leaned over to whisper something urgent in his ear. We played recording after recording, submitted document after document. Thomas Jen's financial evidence, the notarized will, the threatening messages. By the time Mr. Patterson finished, my father looked like he might be sick. Nathaniel had his head in his hands. Judge Morrison called for a recess, her expression unreadable. The 15-minute recess stretched into an hour. I paced in the hallway outside the courtroom. Too anxious to sit still, Mr. Patterson checked his phone, occasionally glancing at my father's attorney, who was having what looked like a very intense conversation with her client. Finally, we were called back in. Judge Morrison had a stack of documents in front of her, and her expression had shifted from neutral to something harder to read. I've reviewed all submitted evidence, she began. The recordings, the financial documents, the authenticated will. She paused. This is one of the more clear-cut cases of fraud I've encountered. My father started to speak, but his attorney grabbed his arm. The will presented by Mr. Rowan and his attorney at the initial reading is demonstrably fraudulent. Judge Morrison continued. The authentic will, properly notarized and witnessed, clearly states that the entirety of Mrs. Rowan's estate passes to her granddaughter, Isabella Rowan. Relief flooded through me so powerfully, I thought I might cry. I dug my fingernails into my palms to stay composed. Furthermore, the judge said, and something in her tone made everyone in the courtroom sit up straighter. The evidence suggests possible criminal activity. I'm ordering a full investigation into the financial irregularities documented in the submitted evidence, Mr. Rowan. You should expect to be contacted by law enforcement regarding potential fraud and embezzlement charges. The courtroom erupted in whispers. My father sat frozen, his face ashen. Then Nathaniel broke. He made me sign things. My brother stood up, his voice cracking. I didn't know what they were. Dad said it was just paperwork, that Grandma wanted it done. Please, you have to believe me. Sit down, my father hissed. No. Nathaniel's hands shook. I have a wife, kids. I can't go to prison. Dad, tell them. Tell them you did it. Judge Morrison's gavel came down hard. Order. Mr. Nathaniel Rowan, you'll have an opportunity to speak with investigators. Right now, this hearing is adjourned. As people filed out, relatives who'd been in the gallery to support my father now avoided his eyes. We met in a conference room at Mr. Patterson's office. Neutral territory. My father arrived with Ms. Carver, both of them looking exhausted. The confidence and rage I'd seen before had evaporated, leaving behind something smaller and diminished. I sat across the table from the man who'd raised me, who'd called me ungrateful in front of our entire family, who'd tried to steal everything my grandmother wanted me to have. He looked older now. Gray stubble covered his jaw. His expensive suit hung a little loose, like he'd lost weight in the past few weeks. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Ms. Carver began. What do you want? I asked, my voice flat. My father cleared his throat. I want to explain. Explain what? The fraud. The embezzlement. Which part needs explaining? He flinched. I was desperate. The business was failing. I'd made some bad investments. Your grandmother's money was just sitting there, and I thought I could borrow it. Pay it back before anyone noticed. But you didn't pay it back. You took more. And then you tried to take everything. I know. His voice cracked. I know what I did. I never thought you'd fight back. The admission hung in the air between us. I'd spent my whole life being compliant, agreeable, trying to earn his approval. He counted on that continuing forever. You taught me to fight back, I said quietly. Every time you dismissed me, ignored me, made me feel worthless. You taught me exactly how much I could take before I broke. Turns out, I'm stronger than either of us thought. Ms. Carver interjected. My client is willing to cooperate fully with investigators. He'll admit to the fraud, return what assets he can, and accept whatever penalties the court deems appropriate. In exchange, we're asking that you consider a victim impact statement that acknowledges his cooperation. You want me to help him get a lighter sentence? We're asking you to show the same mercy your grandmother might have shown. That phrase lit something hot and angry in my chest. Don't you dare tell me what my grandmother would have wanted. She documented everything because she knew exactly what kind of man her son was. She protected me because he wouldn't. My father's eyes finally met mine. And for the first time in my life, I saw something honest there. Fear, regret. I'm sorry, Isabella. I know that doesn't fix anything. But I am sorry. I stood up. I'll think about it. Can you forgive me? The question came out small, desperate. I looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd shaped so much of my pain. Forgiveness isn't the same as access. I'll consider what you're asking. But you and we're done. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes after the meeting, my hands gripping the steering wheel. My father's question echoed in my mind. Can you forgive me? I didn't know. I honestly didn't know if forgiveness was something I could give, or even if he deserved it. But my grandmother's letter was still in my bag, and I finally felt ready to read it. With shaking hands, I broke the seal. Her handwriting covered 2 pages, neat and careful despite her age. My dearest Isabella, it began. If you're reading this, it means you found everything I left for you. I'm proud of you, though. I wish I could tell you that in person. By now you know what your father did. You know how he manipulated me, stole from me, tried to control the last years of my life. I'm sure you're angry. You have every right to be. But I want you to remember something. Anger is useful. It motivates us to fight for what's right. But if you hold on to it too tightly, it becomes a weight you'll carry forever. Win this battle, my darling girl. Claim what's yours. But don't let the winning poison you. Don't become hard and bitter. Your father did wrong, but he's still your father. He's still human, still capable of regret, even if he doesn't show it well. I'm not asking you to forgive him. I'm not even asking you to let him back into your life. I'm just asking you to win gently, with grace. Be strong, but be kind when you can afford to be. You're better than he is. Don't let his choices change that truth. I love you forever, Graham. Tears streamed down my face. I sat in that parking garage and cried for my grandmother, for the relationship I'd lost with my father, for the painful journey that had brought me here. Then I called Mr. Patterson. I'll write the statement, acknowledging his cooperation. But I'm not lying. I'll tell the truth about what he did and let the judge decide what that means. For his sentence. That's fair, he said quietly. 2 weeks later, I stood in probate court for the final ruling. My father had admitted to the fraud. Investigators had documented the embezzlement. Nathaniel had provided testimony in exchange for immunity. The whole ugly truth was laid bare. I read my statement to the court. I described what my father had done, the pain it caused, the trust he'd broken. I also acknowledged that he'd cooperated with investigators and shown some level of remorse. I don't know if he's truly sorry, I concluded, but I hope he is. I hope he uses whatever time he has left to become a better person. That's more for him than for me. Judge Morrison listened carefully to everything, then delivered her sentence. 3 years in prison with a possibility of parole after 18 months. Restitution to be paid from his remaining assets. Permanent loss of any claim to my grandmother's estate. My father accepted the sentence without protest. As they led him away, he looked back at me one last time. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just stood there, whole and unbroken, watching him face the consequences he'd earned. The house was exactly as I remembered it. My grandmother's house, now legally mine. I'd avoided coming here during the legal battle, afraid that walking through rooms full of memories would be too painful. But now with the court case settled and my father in prison, I finally felt ready. I unlocked the front door with the keys Mr. Patterson had given me and stepped inside. Dust covered everything. The air was stale, like the house had been holding its breath. I walked slowly through the rooms, trailing my fingers along familiar surfaces. The kitchen where she taught me to make bread. The living room where we watched old movies together. The garden she'd loved, now overgrown with weeds. In her study, surrounded by books and framed photographs. I found what I'd been looking for without realizing it. A sense of her presence still lingering in the spaces she'd loved. I sat in her favorite chair, the leather worn smooth from years of use, and whispered, "I did it. Graham, I won." The house was silent, but it felt like an answer anyway. Like she'd been waiting for me to claim what was mine. To stand up for myself the way she'd taught me. I noticed something on her desk. One final sealed envelope with my name written on it in her shaky handwriting. My heart sank. How many last letters had she left me? I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sentence. "The password to my computer is your name backward. There's something else you need to see." Her old computer sat on the desk, covered in dust. I powered it on, typed my name backward, and waited as files appeared on the screen. Photo albums, video messages, recordings of her reading my favorite childhood stories. A gift. Even from beyond the grave, she was still taking care of me. I spent hours going through the files, laughing and crying at memories I'd forgotten. As the sun set outside the study window, my phone rang. "Mr. Patterson, there's been a development," he said. "Your father's attorney called. He wants another meeting." This time, my father came alone. No attorney, no Nathaniel, no one to hide behind. The conference room felt different, with just the two of us. Sitting across from each other, Mr. Patterson standing quietly by the door. My father had aged more in the past month than in the previous decade. Prison had stripped away the polish he'd always maintained. His hair needed cutting. His hands trembled slightly as he placed them on the table. "Thank you for seeing me," he said. His voice was hoarse, smaller than I'd ever heard it. I waited. I learned that silence could be more powerful than words. "I've had a lot of time to think," he continued, "about what I did, about who I became." He paused, struggling. I told myself I was protecting the family. that I deserved your grandmother's money because I'd taken care of her. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of what? Of being ordinary. Of failing. Your grandmother built that business from nothing. She was brilliant and strong, and I always felt like I was living in her shadow. When I started having financial problems, I convinced myself I was just taking what should have been mine anyway. He looked down at his hands, but it wasn't mine. And the worst part is, I didn't just steal money. I stole her dignity, her autonomy, her last years of peace. His voice broke. And then I tried to do the same thing to you. Tears were streaming down his face now. Real tears, not the practiced emotion he'd displayed in court. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said. I don't forgive myself. I just needed you to know that I see it now. I see what I did. And if I could undo any of it, I would. I sat with his words for a long moment. Part of me wanted to believe him. The little girl who'd once loved her father. Desperately wanted to accept this apology and rebuild something from the wreckage. But I've learned to trust actions more than words. What do you want from me? I asked finally. Nothing. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Really sorry. Not because it'll help my case or reduce my sentence, just because you deserved to hear it. We sat in silence. Outside the conference room windows, the city continued its indifferent rhythm. People going about their lives unaware of this small moment of reckoning. I hope prison changes you, I said quietly. I hope you use this time to become someone better. But that's for you, not for me. My life is moving forward without you in it. He nodded slowly. I understand. Maybe someday, I added, surprising myself. When you've proven through years of different choices that you've actually changed, we could talk again. But that's years away. And it's not a promise. Thank you, he whispered. That's more than I deserve. Mr. Patterson opened the door, signaling the meeting was over. My father stood, moving slowly like his bones hurt. At the door, he turned back one last time. Your grandmother would be proud of you, he said. I know I never told you enough, but I'm proud of you too, even though I have no right to be. Then he was gone, escorted back to whatever came next for him. I sat alone in the conference room, feeling something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, exactly, but maybe the beginning of letting go. 3 months later, I stood in the main office of my grandmother's company, surrounded by employees who'd worked for her for decades. Some looked nervous. Others looked curious. All of them were wondering what kind of leader I'd be. Thank you all for being here, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. I know the past few months have been difficult and uncertain, but I want you to know that this company has a future, and it includes all of you. I'd spent those 3 months learning everything I could about the business, meeting with department heads, reviewing financial statements, understanding what my grandmother had built and how my father had nearly destroyed it. My grandmother created this company based on 3 principles, I continued: quality, integrity, and respect. My father forgot those principles. I won't. We're implementing new financial oversight, new transparency measures, and new leadership accountability. I introduced the new CFO I'd hired, a woman with an impeccable reputation and zero tolerance for fraud. I outlined the new policies. I answered questions honestly, even when the answers were hard. As I spoke, I caught sight of Thomas Chen in the back of the room. He nodded at me, a small smile on his face. He kept his job and gained a promotion for his integrity. Good people deserve to be rewarded. After the meeting ended, employees approached me one by one. Some offered support. Others shared stories about my grandmother that made me laugh and cry. A few admitted they'd known something was wrong, but hadn't known how to speak up. You gave us permission to be honest, one longtime manager told me. That matters more than you know. I spent the afternoon in my grandmother's old office, now mine. Her desk, her books, her view of the city she'd loved. I brought some of her photographs from the house, setting them on the shelves alongside my own things. My phone buzzed with a text from Brooke, my best friend who'd supported me through everything. Dinner tonight? Want to celebrate? Yes, I typed back. Celebrating sounds good. Because I was celebrating. Not just the inheritance or the legal victory, but something deeper. I found my voice. I learned to fight for myself. I discovered I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. 6 months after the court ruling, life had settled into a new rhythm. I split my time between running the company and renovating my grandmother's house. The business was thriving under new leadership. The house was slowly transforming from a museum of memories into a home where I could build my own future. Nathaniel reached out occasionally. Short messages, carefully worded, asking nothing. Just letting me know he was working with a therapist. Trying to understand how he had let himself become complicit in our father's schemes. I'm not asking for a relationship, he wrote in one message. I just want you to know I'm trying to be better. I appreciated the honesty. I didn't respond often, but I didn't block him either. Maybe someday we'd rebuild something. Or maybe we wouldn't. I was learning to be okay with uncertainty. Aunt Marion visited the house one Saturday afternoon, bringing homemade cookies and an apology she'd been refining for months. I should have protected you, she said as we sat in the renovated kitchen. When your father said those cruel things, I should have stood up. I was so focused on keeping the peace that I forgot some things that are worth fighting for. Thank you for saying that, I replied, and I meant it. Some relatives had disappeared completely, unable to face their own complicity or unwilling to accept that the family dynamics had fundamentally changed. Others, like Aunt Marion, were trying to build bridges. I accepted the efforts that felt genuine and ignored the ones that didn't. The threatening messages had stopped. The lawsuits had been dismissed. My father's time in prison was marked by regular reports from his attorney about his cooperation and alleged transformation. I filed those reports away without much thought. His journey was his own now. As for me, I was learning to live without the weight of his approval or disapproval. I made decisions based on what I thought was right, not what would minimize his anger. I chose relationships that nourished me instead of draining me. I built a life that felt authentically mine. One evening, I sat on the porch of my grandmother's house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. The garden was blooming again, restored by a team of landscapers who'd followed her original designs. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, sitting in that conference room, listening to my father call me ungrateful. That version of myself felt like someone from another lifetime. She'd been smaller, quieter, perpetually seeking validation from people who'd never give it. I wasn't that woman anymore. The battle had changed me, not by making me harder, but by showing me my own strength. My grandmother had known I'd need that strength. That's why she'd left me everything. Not just the money and property, but the tools to fight for myself. My phone rang. Mr. Patterson. Just wanted to let you know, he said. The last of the legal matters have been resolved. Everything's officially completely yours. No more challenges, no more claims. It's done. Thank you, I said, for everything. You did the hard part, he replied. I just filed paperwork. After we hung up, I sat for a while longer, letting that news settle. It was done. The fight was over. I'd won not just the estate, but something more valuable, myself. A year after that terrible reading, I hosted an open house at the company. Employees, clients, community leaders, all gathered to celebrate a year of growth and renewal. The business had not only survived my father's embezzlement, but thrived under new leadership. I'd commissioned a portrait of my grandmother to hang in the main lobby. She stood before the original storefront, young and determined, ready to build something lasting. The artist had captured that fierce intelligence in her eyes, the strength that had carried her through decades of challenges. During the dedication ceremony, I spoke about her legacy, not just the business she'd built or the money she'd saved, but the values she'd embodied. Integrity when it cost her, kindness when it was inconvenient, strength when others tried to diminish her. She taught me that power isn't about controlling others. I said to the gathered crowd, it's about standing firm in your own truth. She gave me more than an inheritance. She gave me permission to be strong. The audience applauded. Flashbulbs popped as photographers captured the moment. But I barely noticed. I was looking at my grandmother's portrait, remembering everything she'd sacrificed to protect me. After the ceremony, employees and guests mingled, celebrating. Thomas Chen approached his wife, both of them smiling. "Your grandmother would be so proud," he said. "You've honored everything she built." "We honored it together," I replied. "You risked everything to tell the truth." That mattered. As the evening wound down and guests departed, I stood alone in the lobby, looking up at my grandmother's portrait. My phone buzzed. A message from the prison system's automated notification service. Inmate has been transferred to a minimum security facility. Parole hearing scheduled. My father had served 18 months. With good behavior, he'd be eligible for release soon. The thought didn't frighten me anymore. Whatever happened with him next, it wouldn't touch the life I'd built. He'd lost the power to hurt me. I thought about responding to the notification, maybe preparing a statement for the parole board, but I decided against it. He cooperated with investigators. He served his time. What happened next was between him and the justice system. My part in his story was finished. I was writing my own story now. 2 weeks before my father's parole hearing, he sent a letter. It arrived at the company, forwarded through his attorney. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won out. The handwriting was shaky, uncertain. So different from the bold, aggressive script I remembered from childhood notes and birthday cards. "Dear Isabella," it began, "I don't expect you to read this. I'm not even sure I have the right to write it. But I wanted you to know how I'm spending my time here. I've been working in the prison library, teaching other inmates to read, helping with their legal research. It's the first time in years I've done something that wasn't about money or status or proving I was important. I've also been attending therapy groups, talking about the things that drove me to make the choices I made, listening to other men who destroyed their families through greed or pride or fear. It's humbling, painful, necessary. I know I can't undo what I did. I stole from my own mother. I betrayed you. I corrupted Nathaniel. Those facts don't change no matter how sorry I am. But I'm trying to understand why. Why do I value money more than integrity? Why I needed control more than connection? Why I thought diminishing you would somehow make me bigger? I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect a relationship. I just want you to know that I finally see what I lost. And it wasn't the money or the business. It was you, my daughter, the person I should have protected and celebrated instead of hurt. When I get out, I'm moving to a halfway house in Seattle. I'll be working a regular job, living a regular life. I won't contact you unless you want me to. But if you ever decide you want to talk, I'll be here. Not as your father demanding respect, but as a man who owes you a lifetime of apologies and knows he'll never finish paying that debt. I hope you're happy, Isabella. I hope the life you're building brings you joy. You deserve every good thing. With regret and hope, Dad. I read the letter 3 times, searching for manipulation or hidden angles. But it just seemed sad and honest. The words of a broken man trying to find his way back to something resembling redemption. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. I didn't respond. Maybe someday I would. Maybe I wouldn't. But knowing he was finally taking responsibility mattered more than I'd expected. That evening, I visited my grandmother's grave for the first time in months. The headstone was simple, elegant, exactly what she would have wanted. I'd planted roses nearby, her favorite flowers. "He's trying," I told her, speaking to the headstone like she could hear me. "I don't know if it's real or if it'll last, but he's trying." The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, carrying the scent of roses and fresh-cut grass. I imagined her voice, warm and knowing. "What he does isn't your responsibility anymore, sweetheart. You're free." And I was. The battle was over. The inheritance was mine. The truth was known. I'd fought and won. Not just in court, but in the deeper war for my own dignity and self-worth. Whatever my father did next, whatever choices he made or didn't make, belonged to him. My choices belonged to me, and I was choosing peace. I stood in the garden behind my grandmother's house. my hands deep in the rich soil, planting the last of the spring bulbs. In a few months, this space would explode with color, tulips and daffodils and crocuses. Exactly like the gardens my grandmother had loved. The house was fully mine now, not just legally, but emotionally. I'd repainted walls, updated fixtures, filled rooms with my own books and art. The past lived here, but so did the future. Both could be true at once. My phone buzzed. Brooke, asking if I wanted to meet for dinner. I smiled, thinking about the people who'd stood by me through everything. The friends who'd never doubted me. Never asked me to be smaller or quieter or more convenient. Yes, I texted back. 6 o'clock? As I finished planting, I heard a car pull into the driveway. Aunt Marion, arriving for our weekly tea. She'd become a regular presence in my life, trying through small gestures to make up for her earlier silence. I'd let her. Not because I needed her validation, but because people deserved the chance to grow. We sat on the porch with chamomile tea and homemade scones, talking about the company, the garden, and her grandchildren. Normal conversation unburdened by the weight of family trauma. You've done something remarkable, she said eventually. Not just saving the business or winning the inheritance. You've created a real life for yourself. That takes courage. I had a good teacher, I replied, thinking of my grandmother. After she left, I walked through the house one more time, ending in my grandmother's study. Her portrait hung above the desk now, watching over the space where I worked. I'd added my own touches. New books, plants on the windowsill, a photograph of my friends. I picked up the final letter she'd written to me, the one about winning gently. I'd read it so many times the paper was soft from handling. But the words never lost their power. I sat at the desk and pulled out fresh stationery. For a long moment, I just held the pen, considering what I wanted to say and to whom. Finally, I began to write. Dad, I received your letter. I appreciate your honesty. I'm not ready for regular contact, but I want you to know I hope you find peace. We both deserve that. Take care of yourself, Isabella. Short, honest, creating a boundary while leaving a door slightly cracked. Not forgiveness. Exactly. But not complete rejection either. Just the truth. We were both human. Both capable of failure and growth. Both deserving of the chance to build better lives. I sealed the letter and placed it on the desk to mail tomorrow. Then I turned off the lights and stepped out into the garden. The evening air was cool and sweet. Stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, I heard laughter from neighbors enjoying their own evening. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, sitting at that mahogany table, listening to her father call her ungrateful. She felt powerless, diminished, erased. But she'd been wrong. She'd never been powerless. She'd just been waiting for permission to be strong, waiting for someone else to validate her worth. My grandmother's final gift wasn't the money or the house or the business. It was teaching me that I didn't need anyone's permission to claim what was mine. Not property, not inheritance, but dignity, self-respect, the unshakable knowledge that I deserved better than I'd been accepting. I'd fought for that knowledge. I'd stood up when it would have been easier to sit down. I'd spoken truth when silence would have been safer. And in doing so, I'd won something more valuable than any estate. I'd won myself back. The wind stirred the roses my grandmother loved. The house stood solid behind me, full of light and possibility. The business thrived under my leadership. My future stretched ahead, unwritten and mine to shape. I whispered to the evening air. To my grandmother, wherever she was. To the universe that had carried me through this battle. Thank you for believing in me. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt completely, perfectly whole. Not because I destroyed my father or claimed a fortune, but because I discovered my own strength and learned to trust it. The war was over. Peace had won, and I was finally truly free.